Hi, I've been getting some questions regarding the graphing sine and cosine homework problems. So I just wanted to go over some problems with you, and, to help you get a better understanding of the graphs. So this is number 6 in the homework 2.5 part 1, excuse me, graphing sine and cosine functions. And it says it's y equals 4 cosine of 4 parentheses x minus pi over 3 plus 4. Okay, so let's go over each of the different parts. Okay, so here it says to determine the period. Okay, the period you can always solve by taking the 2 pi and dividing by the b. The b is the value in front of the x. So in this case, the period is 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. So my period is pi over 2. Let me type that in. Okay. So after we find the period, you find the phase shift by taking what's inside, right, the cosine here, the parentheses, and then setting that equal to 0. And we can do that by adding pi over 3 to both sides here at the phase shift. And so the phase shift is equal to pi over 3. And that's also, you can think of the phase shift, that's the first starting value for the 5 key points. The range, so if you think about the range, if I think about this graph here, and just do a rough sketch. Remember here, this is the vertical shift. The vertical shift, the D is also known as your midline. So I know that 1, 2, 3, 4, my midline is going to be at 4. The amplitude tells you how high and how low it goes from the midline. So if your midline's at 4, if I go up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, the highest this is going to go is 8. So that's the highest. And then the lowest going to go, if I go down 4, because that's my amplitude, the lowest it can go, and let me use a different color, is 0, right? Because your amplitude is 4. So the range goes from 0 all the way to 8. So you write the range as an interval going from bracket 0 to 8. Okay. Next, we have to choose a graph. So you can use a calculator to graph this, right? And I can also see which of these, let's try eliminating some that doesn't make sense. So if I know that our midline is at 4, my graph better have a midline at 4. So if you look at this graph does have a midline of 4, so it might be A. B has a midline at -4, so I can eliminate B. Graph C has a midline at +4, so maybe it's this. D has a midline of -4, so I can eliminate graphs B and D. So it's between A and C. But remember, our phase shift was pi over 3. So that means the first starting point has to be at pi over 3. So if you look at this first graph, right, this first point you see here, you can't really tell, but since this is pi, it looks like the phase shift, the first point is at pi over 3. This one, the first point, this is at 0. So I'm going to go with A because it matches our phase shift. So let's check it out. Okay, good. And now it's going to, I think this is the most tedious part, to find the 5 key points. The 5 key points, it actually wants you to find what's the coordinate of these 5 points. The y value is easy to find, right? Because you can see this is 8, this is 4, this is 0, and this one is 4, and this one's 8. But now what are the x values? So we're going to go ahead and do that. And so to find the x values, I'm actually going to go ahead and erase all this. Okay, and keep the phase shift, and I'll write the phase shift up here. Remember the phase shift, we found that it was pi over 3. We found that the period was pi over 2. So what that means is one full period from the beginning to the end. This is pi over 2 units, because that's the period. But because I want the key points, we have to divide that into 4 parts, because we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 parts we need to break up into. And that also matches your period. If you think about the unit circle, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 quadrants. And so how you get the 4 different parts is what we call the x scale. And how do you find the x scale is you take the period and you divide into fourths. So I'm going to take the period, which is pi over 2, divide by 4. And now we can simplify this as do pi over 2 times the reciprocal of 4, which is 1 over 4. So our x scale is pi over 8. Just means each of these units, I need to go up by pi over 8s. Okay, now, so I need to make a table. It's kind of hard to do it on the screen, but I'll do it here. So X, pick a different color. We have X, Y. Actually, let me do it over here. Okay, the first value is going to be your phase shift. Here's pi over 3. And then we need 5 key points. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time you want to get the next point, we have to add the x scale. So we have to add pi over 8 each unit. Okay, so we're going to do that. This part's a little tedious, but if you have a calculator that you can use, you can find fractions with. It's easy to do, but I'll just do it by hand here. So if we do pi over 3, we're going to add pi over 8. The common denominator here is, let's see, 24. So I'm going to make it into 24ths. So I need to multiply this by 3. And so I get 8 pi over 24 plus 3 pi over 24. And that reduces, or that becomes 11 pi over 24. So that's our first, that's our next value, 11 pi over 24. Just want to double check that I'm doing this correctly. 8 pi over 24 plus 3 pi over 24 will have 11 pi over 24. Now we have to add the 11 pi over 24 to pi over 8 again. Let me just write pi over 8. Let me convert that. If I do times 3, that'll be 3 pi over 24. So I really just need to add 3 pi over 24 each time, right? Because pi over 8 is 3 pi over 24. And that'll be 14 pi over 24. And that reduces to, if I divide by 2, 7 pi over 12. So this is 7 pi over 12. Okay, so now I need to add 7 pi over 12 to pi over 8 again. But I know 7 pi over 12 is really 14 pi over 24. So I'll add 14 pi over 24 plus pi over 8, which is just 3 pi over 24. And that's 17 pi over 24. And I need to add 7 pi over 24 to pi over 8, or pi over 8, right? Which is again 3 pi over 24. So I'm going to add 17 pi over 24 plus 3 pi over 24, which is 20 pi over 24. You got to reduce your fractions, I believe. My math lab doesn't like if you don't reduce. So this is, I can divide out, looks like a 4. So it'll be 5 pi over 6. And then it looks like we're done with finding the the x values. Now, how do we find the y values? Well, remember we picked this graph. Okay, so at this point, this is pi over 3. At pi over 3, what's the y coordinate? It's 8, right? Because here the y value is 8. Okay, the next value, this one, is 11 pi over 24. And what's the y value? Well, it was at the midline, so that's going to be 4. Now, what's the next one? This middle one is 7 pi over 12. And what's the y value? That's 0. 17 pi over 24, it's this point. That's going to be at 4 again. 5 pi over 6 is our last point. 5 pi over 6. And the y value is 8. Okay, I'm hoping I didn't make any calculation errors. I'm going to type that all in. And this is also, you have to type in all the points as pi over 3, comma, comma 8. And then do another comma, do 11 pi over 24, comma 4. And then the third point, 7 pi over 12, comma 0. And then 17 pi over 24, comma 4. And then 5 pi over 6, comma 8. Okay, let's see. And if not, we'll have to go back. Okay, so I did do the calculations correctly. So it's a little tedious to find the 5 points, but if you're, just remember to add your x scale with it. So I want to do another question. I'll do a couple questions here. So let's look at number 7. So we got y equals 6 sine, parentheses, bracket 2, parentheses, x minus pi over 6 plus the 6. Let's find the period first. And we find the period by doing 2 pi over b, the b being the 2. So this is 2 pi over 2, and our period is pi. Okay, the phase shift is we take x minus pi over 6, we set it equal to 0, solve for x, so we're going to add pi over 6 to both sides to cancel that, and you get x is equal to pi over 6. And that's also going to be the first x value for my key point. Now the range, so we have to think about it here. The range is, if you think about what's the midline is 6. And the amplitude is 6. So I know I need to go up 6. The highest it can go is 12. I need to go down 6. The lowest it can go is 0. So the range, right, your function is going to be oscillating between these values. And so the range goes from 0 all the way to 12. And so you write that as bracket 0, comma 12. Okay, now if we want to select the correct picture, let's again use the process of elimination. And your midline has to be at 6. So this is at -6. This is at 6, so this is a possibility. This is at 6, so this is a possibility. D, the midline is at -6. So we're between B and C. We know, though, that our phase shift is pi over 6. So our first point better start at pi over 6. You see this first point, the x value is 0. This one, it looks like it moved over, so that's going to be at pi over 6. So we're going to go with C. All right, and now let me erase some stuff. Okay, now the key points, the tedious part, but it's really not too bad. First, you find the x scale by taking the period and dividing into fourths. Again, you divide into fourths because the whole period is pi, but you're dividing into 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, right? There's 4 different parts. So I'm trying to break up the period into fourths to get each of those values. So if we divide pi, the period, by 4, it's just pi over 4. So that's a number we're going to add to the phase shift. So our value, I'll do it here, x, y. Our first value is your phase shift, pi over 6. And I have to add pi over 4 each time. And so, and then I'm going to, so adding pi over 4 each time to this, adding pi over 4 each time. But when you add pi over 4, between trying to think of common denominators. If I add, I need the common denominator. Okay, so let's do pi over 6 plus pi over 4. The common denominator here is going to be 12. I'm going to multiply. Again, you can use your calculator for this, but I'm just going to do it by hand. So the common denominator here, we got 2 pi over 12 plus 3 pi over 12, which is 5 pi over 12. Okay, and then I'm going to have 5 pi over 12 and add pi over 4. And pi over 4, we know that's 3 pi over 12. So I'm just going to say this is 3 pi over 12, which is 8 pi over 12, which reduces to, if I divide by 2, 4 pi over 6. Actually, I can divide it again, 2 pi over 3. Okay. Now I need to add 2 pi over 3, need to add pi over 4 again. And I'm going to multiply this by 4, and this by 3, and that'll be 8 pi over 12 plus 3 pi over 12, which is 11 pi over 12. I need to do it one more time, add pi over 4 to that. I need more space. And so 11 pi over 12 plus another pi over 4, and remember that's just 3 pi over 12. So that's 14 pi over 12, which should become 7 pi over 6. Okay, the y value, use the graph that you chose. The graph that you chose goes from 0 to 12. So your first value is, we chose C actually. We chose C. Okay, let me just erase all this. Okay, at pi over 6, it's at 6. At pi over 12, it's at 12. The y value at x equals 2 pi over 3 is 6 again. When x is 11 pi over 12, the y value is 0. And then the y value at 7 pi over 6 is 6. All right, so this is the moment of truth where I hope that I didn't make any calculation errors, but now I have to type this all in. Pi over 6, comma 6. And then 5 pi over 12, comma 12. And then 2 pi over 3, comma 6. 11 pi over 12, 0. And then 7 pi over 6 is 6. Okay, let's check our answer. All right, we did good with that too. Let's do another one. I think the more practice, the better. Okay, we just did 7. So let's do 8. All right, for this one, we have the period is 2 pi over b, and b is 4. And so that's pi over 2. You know, it's going to ask for phase shift next, so let's write that too. Phase shift is x minus pi over 4 equals 0. We always said equal to 0, and we add pi over 4 here. And then you get x is equal to pi over 4. And then it's going to ask for the range, so I'll just do range as well. The range, the midline is 7, right? The D is your midline. So if I know that it's going to be at 7, the midline, and the amplitude tells me how high I can go, so it's +2, it's going to go up to a maximum 9. The lowest I can go is subtract 2, 7 minus 2 is 5. So it's between 9, 5, right? It's going to oscillate between that. So your range is going to be from 5 all the way to 9. Okay, so let me type that all in before I go on to the next one. So pi over 2. And then the phase shift is pi over 4. And then the range is 5 to 9. Okay, and now it asks for the graph. Let me just put the period is pi over 2. I'm going to write my phase shift is pi over 4. And then we know the midline is 7. Okay, so if I erase all this, okay, let's find the ones that have midline of 7. So the midline of the ones that have 7 as a midline is graphs B and, actually not B, that's -7. C and D, so you can see it has a midline at 7. But because our phase shift, right, the first value needs to be at pi over 4, and this one, the phase shift didn't move, it's at 0. We have to go with this one because this one, it shifted pi over 4. I know it can't be D because it didn't shift at all, so we're gonna go with C. Okay, now we find the key points. The key points, can we start with your, the first value is going to be your phase shift. Which is pi over 4. And then we have to get 5 points. And what do we add? We add the x scale. How do we find the x scale? You find the x scale by taking the period and dividing by 4. We said the period is pi over 2. And if we divide by 4, that's like doing pi over 2 times the reciprocal of 4, which is 1 over 4. So it's pi over 8. So our x scale is pi over 8. So I need to add pi over 8 to each of these values. Okay, we're going to go up by pi over 8 each time. Okay, so I need to do that now. So pi over 8, or actually pi over 4 plus pi over 8. I'm going to make this into 8s. So 2 pi over 8 plus pi over 8, oops, equals is 3 pi over 8. I have to add 3 pi over 8 plus pi over 8 is 4 pi over 8, which is pi over 2. pi over 2, which is 4 pi over 8. So I'm going to have 4 pi over 8, pi over 8, which is 5 pi over 8. Then I'm going to have to add 5 pi over 8 plus 3, which is pi over 8, which is 6 pi over 8, which is 3 pi over 4. Okay, so we found that, and then since we picked this graph, you can see at pi over 4, it's at 7. At 3 pi over 8, it's at the peak, which is 9. And then at pi over 2, it's at 7 again. The fourth point, 5 pi over 8, is going to be at 5. And then it's at 7 again. Okay, so we type this all out. Pi over 8, 9. And then pi over 2, 7. And then 5 pi over 8, 5. And then finally 3 pi over 4, 7. Okay, great. Maybe I'll just do one more, but hopefully this is helping. Let's see. Okay, let's just do another 9. I'm gonna do, okay. So number 9, we have the period is 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. The phase shift, you take x plus pi over 2, set it equal to 0. So x is equal to negative pi over 2. And then the range is we have the midline at 5. And amplitude tells me that I need to go up to 10. And then go down to 0. Oops, this should be plus 5 and minus 5. So we know the range, or the lowest value and the highest value for the y's are 0, 10. Okay, let me type that all in. So period is pi. Phase shift this time is negative pi over 2. Range is 0, 10. And to find the correct one, we need to find the midline that has a positive 5. So it's either this one, A, or kind of hard to see, or this one. Okay, these have midlines at negative 5. So it's between A and D. We want to pick where there's a phase shift to negative pi over 2. And you can see that this one looks like it has a phase shift to negative. I'm guessing this is negative pi over 2 because this one has no phase shift. It starts at 0. And so we're going to go with A. Okay, now the key points. Okay, the key points, let's find the first value. And 5 points. First value always being the phase shift. And what do we need to add? We need to add the x scale. I didn't find the x scale yet. X scale is the period over 4. That's pi over 4. So we have to add pi over 4 to each of those values to get the next one. So we're adding pi over 4. Okay, so let's do this. We have negative pi over 2 plus pi over 4. I can get common denominator of 2, so this equals negative 2 pi over 4 plus pi over 4, which is negative pi over 4. Negative pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 0. 0 plus pi over 4 is just pi over 4. Pi over 4 plus another pi over 4 is 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. Okay, so we found all the values for x. Now we just need to find the y. If you think about using the graph and finding the y value, we can say, okay, at negative pi over 2, the y value is at the midline, which is 5. At negative pi over 4, the y value is at the peak, which is at 10. At 0, it's at 5. Pi over 4, it's at 0. And at pi over 2, it's at 5. Okay, so we have our 5 key points. Let's just type it in. This is where we hope we didn't make any calculation errors. Negative pi over 2, 5. Negative pi over 4, 10. 0, 5. Pi over 4. You also need to make sure you're typing in your commas correctly. Pi over 2, 5. And let's check. Okay, so I hope that was helpful in finding the key points. I also want to do, actually maybe we'll do this one and then we'll go to the 2.5 part 2. Okay, I'll do one more on this one. So here, if we want to find a curve using y equals cosine x, if it's stretched by a factor of 3, I need a 3 in front of the cosine x. If it's shifted distance pi over 2 to the right, your actually horizontal shifts are actually the opposite. So I need to go minus pi over 2. It says translated 5 units downward. That's going to be a vertical shift minus 5. Reflected on the x-axis means you need a negative in front of the 3. And so let's actually see. It's I'm not seeing a translated 5 units downward. So let's see. This one's a little tricky because I don't see the answer that I have. Now I'm thinking about it. I think it's because the reflection, right? The reflection on the x-axis is actually going to, so if you think about this, if it shifted it, and say I've shifted this down to -5, so that's your midline. When it reflects it onto the x-axis, it's actually going to make the midline a +5. And so that's why you need a +5. Although it's translated down 5 downwards, after it reflects, it's actually going to push the midline up to +5. So this one, I'm glad I'm going over this one because this one was a little tricky. See. Maybe I should do this one too. Okay, so 11, how you graph these are, we're going, basically this is a cosine, -5 cosine 2 pi over x plus 4. You're gonna go with the cosine tool and just click it anywhere on the graph. And then you see the amplitude, right? The amplitude is 5. The period, we get the period by doing 2 pi divided by b, and the b in this case is 2 pi. And so it's 1. And then I think it already had the 1 there. Okay, so the period's 1. The vertical shift, that's the D, that's the +4. And so I need to put 4 here. And then there is no phase shift, right? Because there is nothing being added or subtracted from X. And there's a reflection over the X-axis, and how you know is because there's a negative in front of the 5. And so then I'm just going to save that, and then you just check. I got it wrong, so let's see why. Yeah, let's double check what I typed into the thing. So amplitude is 5, period is 1. The vertical shift is +4, so I actually need to, forgot there, I don't know why I had a negative there, but reflect over the X-axis. And we save, we check our answer. Okay, so let's actually move on to 2.5 part 2. So 2.5 part 2. There's a couple problems I wanted to go over with you. And let's see. Okay, so this is 2.5 part 2. And it's for this, you're gonna come up with the equations that give you the graph that you're given. And so I'll do a couple with you here. So for this one, you have a graph, and you need to go with either the sine or the cosine function. How I decide is if it doesn't start at 0, 0, like this one starts at 4, I go with the cosine. If it starts at 0, 0, or if it goes through 0, 0, I should say I go with sine. So this one, I'm going to go with the cosine function. Okay. The next thing we need to do is determine the amplitude. The amplitude is how high does it go from the midline? What's the distance? So the wave length, this is 4. So the the amplitude is 4. Now, how do you find B? B is, remember the formula, the period is equal to 2 pi over B. Well, if I rewrote this, this can also be B is equal to 2 pi over the period, right? If I switched B around and multiply B on both sides, and then this would be, right, the B's would cancel, and I would divide both sides by the period. So I'm going to use this formula that B is equal to 2 pi over the period. Now, how do we find the period? The period is the how wide one wavelength is. So for a cosine function, one wavelength is, if you go from the top down the top, so this is one wavelength. And how wide is that? Well, it's pi units wide, right? From here to there is pi units. And so the period is 2 pi. And so you have B is equal to 2 pi over the period, which is pi. And here that cancels out. So B is 2. So you have Y is equal to 4 cosine of 2x. Let's type it in to see if we have that correct. Oops. Forgot the 4. Okay, let's try. This one looks similar, so maybe. Actually, we'll do this one too. Okay, so this is again the cosine function, because you see it doesn't go through 0, 0. I'm going to go with the cosine, and the amplitude again is 4, because from the midline to the top is 4 units. Now, what's the period? The period is, let's see, from here, that's one wavelength. The period is 4 pi units. And so to get the b, you take the period and you divide, or no, take 2 pi, divide by the period, and this is 2 pi over 4 pi, which the pi's cancel and you got 1/2. So the equation is y is equal to 1 over, no, sorry, 4 cosine of 1 over 2x. Okay, so this one here is, you can see that it goes through 0, 0. So I'm going to go with the sine curve. And same idea, see what the amplitude is. And the amplitude looks like it's 2. And then the period of a sine curve is it goes from 0, 0 to the top of the curve, down, and then back up. So it's pi units long. That's your period. And so b is 2 pi divided by the period, which is 2. So we have now y is equal to 2 sine of 2x. Okay, this is similar, so I'm going to actually see if there's another one that's not as similar. Okay, this one. So this one, I can see that it's going to be the cosine curve, right? Because it doesn't go through 0, 0. And so for this one, we're going to go with the cosine. But the amplitude, how high it is, right, is going to be 3. But because it's at -3, the a is going to be, or there's going to be a negative in front of the a. So cosine, we don't know what b is yet. Okay, to find b, we need to find the period first. So the period is from the lowest point high and then go back to the lowest point. So it's pi. So the b is equal to 2 pi over the period, and then it's just 2. So this is going to be y equals -3 cosine of 2x. Okay, I must have gotten this wrong. Let's see what I did wrong. Ah, I typed the 2. Okay, let's see number 9. Number 9 is similar to what we just did because, and then it looks, the variables look funny here, but just think about y equals a sine of bx or cosine x. This is going to be a cosine, again, a negative cosine because it's, right, it starts at -2. Actually, maybe we should do this because the period is kind of hard to see what it is. Okay, so the amplitude is going to be 2 because it's right from 0 to 2. That's the amplitude. And I know I need a negative because it's starting at -2. The period is from the lowest point to the highest back to the lowest. And if this is 11, and I know this, it has to end there. Let's see. So this is 10, 9, 8, 7. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the period is 7. And you have b is equaling 2 pi divided by the period. So it's 2 pi over 7. And so this one is cosine, or -2 cosine of 2 pi over 7x. Okay, I want to find one when there's a negative sign. So let's see. Actually, this one has a fraction, so maybe we should do this one too. Okay, this here is going to be a cosine because it's not going through 0, 0, goes through 4/9, and it's a positive, there's no reflection. And so the midline is 0, but the amplitude is 4/9. I'm going to go with cosine. Let's figure out what b is. So the period, this is 1 period. Oh, this is actually not too bad. 2. So the period is 2. So b is 2 pi over the period. So it's pi. So this is 4/9 cosine of pi over x. Or pi x, I should say. Okay, I'm looking for one when there's a negative sign or reflection. Oh, let's do this one because this one has a vertical shift. Okay, so now let's choose. Okay, so if we drew a midline, looks like there's a midline at 1. You can see how it's not starting at the midline. So we're gonna with the cosine function. And you can see it's starting at the dip, right? Not at the top. So if it starts at the bottom, this is going to be a negative cosine function. The amplitude is 1, is from 1 to 2. You go up 1 and then down 1, so that's the amplitude. So I know it's going to be negative cosine of bx. I'm going to rewrite this as bx plus d. So b is the 2 pi over the period. And period, you can see, is 7/4. So if you do 2 pi divided by 7/4, you rewrite this as 2 pi times 4/7, which is 8 pi over 7. So we know this is 8 pi over 7x. And then the midline is your shift, so that's at 1. Oops. So this is y equals negative cosine of 8 pi over 7 x, close that, and then add our midline shift. Okay. Trying to find one when there's a negative sign, but I don't see any. Wonder if I do a similar question. Okay, here's one. Okay, I wanted one when there's a negative. Okay, so this goes through 0, 0. So I see it goes through 0, 0. So it's going to be a negative sine function. How I know it's negative is you can see it dips first, right? A positive sine function starts at 0, 0, goes up and then down. But you can see this one goes down and then up. And then the amplitude is 4. So I know it's going to be y equals negative 4 sine. Then we need to find b of x. The period of one side wavelength is pi, and so b is equal to 2 pi over the period, which is pi. The pi's cancel, and so it's 2. And so this one is negative 4 sine of 2x. Let's type that in and see if we got this correct. Okay, I'm going to do the last one as well because the last one looks a little different. The last one is number 16, and that's the figure shows a depth of okay, so this one has the figure shows a depth of water at the end of a boat dock. The depth is 10 feet at low tide, and it goes up to 18 feet. And these are the times of the low tides and the high tides. And it tells you we have to use a cosine function to model this. Okay, let's start with the amplitude. The midline, it's, let's see, this is 14, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. The midline's at 14, so that tells me D is 14. The amplitude, it says it goes up to 18, right? And the lowest it goes to is 10. So the amplitude from the midline to the highest point is 4. Now all we need to do is find the period to find B. So the period of this cosine function is 12 hours. So there's one period and there's another period. So the period is 12 hours. So B is 2 pi over the period. So 2 pi over 12, which reduces to pi over 6. And so this would be y equals the amplitude 4 of cosine of pi over 6x parentheses plus the midline 14. And then we'll just check to see. And we got it correct. Okay, so I hope this helped you with some of the problems. If you have other issues or questions, feel free to send them, right? I'm more than happy to help.